Hey everybody, welcome. Here we are chatting again about relationships and masculine and feminine dynamics. While there is so much that we can say, and a lot of this on the surface looks like it's coming from more of a therapeutic lens, perhaps, we're not really talking about the therapy or the therapeutic dynamics. We're talking about our spiritual and soul evolution and the ways in which we develop and evolve from that place. So this is why we go from karmic to conscious to sacred unions, right? Because we all traverse this spectrum of our learning and growth and maturation on a very human level, but we're also really moving towards maturation on a spiritual level, which is based on divine love. The big agape, the big love that is both personal and non-personal. So I wanted to talk a little bit. So we did some videos on the dynamics, and I'm going to piggyback on some of those dynamics a little bit more. And I have two different things written out here, and if I connect them all in one without it going too long, that will be a miracle. But I'm going to just start with some of the basics and see how we are with that. So when we're talking about the masculine and feminine, we all hold masculine and feminine qualities and polarity within us. I am talking about it primarily strictly from masculine, feminine, male, female, man, woman. And yet, you can have, like we've talked about before, a man can have a stronger feminine than a masculine, and the feminine can have a stronger masculine than the innate feminine. But we're going to keep it, as evenly balanced for ease of description. But there are so many nuances, so just kind of feel into your own self, because really this is about feeling into who are you on these levels and how do you then interact with others, particularly your partners or potential partners, in their placements, in their alchemy, in their essence of the masculine and feminine that they hold. So if we start looking at the emotionality and the more outside of the box, the more unknown realms of the feminine, right? The soulful feminine essence and energy is a little bit more unpredictable by nature. Think about nature, right? Think about the ocean tides and how versatile they are. And then you have the masculine, which tends to be more contained. You've got the feminine, right, with the emotionality. You've got sensory ways of communicating and being in relationship with the world. You've got symbolism, and feminines typically, right, have the need to relate, the need to come into relationship. This is what the feminine teaches. This is the feminine part of the balancing. And then you've got the masculine, right, that's got that containment, that naturally has that more one-pointedness, that is more linear, literal, logical, rational, and they like things to be tangible with material proof, so to speak, kind of like science, right? And oftentimes that emotional need to connect from the feminine can be in opposition to the masculine's need for separation. Now, both are appropriate. Both have their perfect alignment because they are the two opposites of that pendulum swinging. The magic is to recognize that neither of these are wrong or bad. They're both needed and necessary for harmonization and wholeness, both within oneself and the relationship. I said in the last video that we have the soulful presence, that embodied physicality is the feminine, and then that spirit is more of that inspiration. It's more of that instinct versus intuition. Okay? So it's much more of the air quality. And it usually comes from the head and the intellect. The marriage that we're all embarking on is marrying our head and heart. The chakras of our upper centers through the heart into our lower centers. So oftentimes, right, you're going to get, if there isn't a clear understanding, and if we're each only rooted in like our way, the feminine can take her emotions, can take her need to connect, can take her need to communicate as this is the way that it should be, and it should look like I look from the female, from the woman's standpoint. The masculine is going to have their bent. Well, I need to see it and understand it linearly. It doesn't make sense. You're talking ethereally, so to speak, and I just need the facts, right? My dad used to say to me, so what is the point? Because I tend to have stories. I tend to operate from more of the sensory. My work has been, how do I marry my thinking process, my intellectual thinking process, with my embodied knowing? Okay? So, he would say, so what's the point? And when I was younger, I would take that really personally, like I was communicating wrong, like I was, not getting it, or I was wrong. That wasn't really what he was meaning, and yet from the masculine standpoint, he didn't need all the nuances and stories. So some of you might feel that way listening to my videos, like, what's the point? So that's kind of your masculine, whether you're a man or a woman. That's your masculine wanting, like, what are the facts? And are they really facts? Right? So the masculine can take it as that is the way that communication should happen. When both are appropriate at the right times, in the right measure, within the right space and context. That is an art form in and of itself that is going to be present for each relationship. Right? There isn't just one set rule for any of this. Now, when we're looking at the relational need, right? The feminine is what helps to support with the magnetics, the magnetics of the elements, supports the electrical fusion of the masculine to be drawn out of containment and to come into relationship. So, right, this is part of how that polarity operates together. And it is the masculine that operates and can be in containment that teaches the feminine about the relational need for separation. Now, this is where we get to the crux, and I guess I am going to go into this. So, when we have wounding, the majority of our base level core wounds are going to, we can just put them under an umbrella, okay? Fear is the biggest umbrella. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being loved. And I'm going to bring this over a little bit, okay? Fear, perhaps, of being overtaken, fear of being smothered, fear of being overwhelmed. Now, I put the initial ones under more of what we're familiar with, right? And it all comes down to really fear of being left alone and not being loved, of not being met, of not being in that deep connection, in that bonded space. Now, this is much more, I think, a feminine, overt experience. And again, right, all of this is nuanced. And this can kind of show up, we're going to see the other side of it, as if the feminine feels like the masculine is pulling his energy away from a wounded space. That begins to feel like rejection and abandonment. Now, when that kicks in, the feminine, who may be normally really balanced and stable and, sweet and kind and patient, when she feels in connection, okay, can kind of have a threshold and a tolerance. And this usually goes along with communication, right? Being, having the understanding of what it is that's happening. Now, it's not uncommon for, if some of that is not in place, there can be the wounding that gets triggered that transforms that lovely, loving partner, right? That woman into this volatility of unpredictability, of many emotions that feel very chaotic, right? That feel out of control, that feel big, that feel demanding, and that start to maybe even cling onto the masculine. Now, that is a deep, deep fear of a deep vulnerability that maybe has been accessed and opened up in relationship. And then the fear that stems way back, right? We could go back to childbirth, we could go back even before that. Starts waking up all of this neediness because there's fear. And if it's not recognized, it's free floating and it might just explode. Now, for the masculine, who maybe has been steady as he goes, connected, present, even communicative, grounded, stable, predictable, right? Feeling safe for the feminine. And the feminine has felt safe for the masculine. This is usually in those beginning stages, right, where we kind of open up and these ways of being become really, they're kind of innate. because we're both seeking love and we're both seeking connection, but that connection and expression of love and those needs are very different. So when the feminine gets triggered, the normal, or in general, containment and groundedness, linear, logical, rational part of the masculine begins to see this sort of out of controlness as very scary. Okay? It can feel dangerous. The irrationality, right, feels out of control, which wants to compel the masculine to gain more control, right? To gain more grounding, because those are some of those masculine traits, to gain more clarity intellectually. But the feminine is not coming energetically from an intellectual place. She's coming from a deep emotional place. And the masculine, depending on where you're at on the spectrum, doesn't always swim in the emotional realms comfortably. So the masculine will pull their energy in even more strongly and maybe separate even more, right? They need space. They need time to think. They have to leave the situation in order to create boundaries, in order to balance themselves out, and in time to process and think things through. And when they can think things through, they can begin to tap into what their emotions might be. Now, this is kind of like a self-preservation response. And what can tend to happen if we're operating in karmic patterns, from karmic woundings, and you don't have the tools or the skills, you're at a level of maturity that hasn't really been able to access greater wisdom through experience or through healing to really recognize what's happening. So if this isn't addressed, if it's not like caught in time, right? Both might even out, but if it isn't discussed, and if this becomes a pattern, there becomes more and more distance between the two. And those initial characteristics that came together from a place of openness and revealing and both being vulnerable in their own ways, right? So vulnerability for the feminine or for the woman, one expression of that, might very well be having this trust, like I can really let my heart open. I can really trust and love this person and receive their love. And for the masculine, it may be similar, and it may be like, I feel really seen. I feel deeply understood, right? I can be myself with this person. I can show up and be appreciated and respected for who I am. Because probably at the beginning, right, there's this opening. Now, who opens more first, like whatever, that's not really relevant here. What's relevant is there is the right level of openness to allow a deepening, to allow enough safety to come up, right? But when this happens, this begins to create distance. And if the pattern continues, then it becomes a dynamic in the relationship. And there's this way that we create our biggest fear. So the more that the feminine, if she doesn't learn to come into her emotional realm and learn to stabilize and heal her abandonment, her fear of rejection, her fear of separation. If she's relying on the masculine to give that to her, those needs tend to amplify because now the ground isn't quite as stable as, we might have anticipated. So whenever the masculine just needs space, right, needs to kind of go into their containment, this is going to get triggered. She's going to become, upheavaled. He's going to want to retreat and get away. And he's going to feel overwhelmed, and she's going to feel dangerous. So, and I'm saying the dangerous because I think that, like, I've heard just over the years and in different scenarios, right? There's very much a danger factor that men feel regarding women. Now, some women might not understand that, right? Because we think of danger sometimes as being more literal, physically being in danger. But men can, if depending on their connection with their emotions, men can feel the danger as overwhelming and out of control, and that in and of itself, and in the realm of not understanding, can feel dangerous. And they need to preserve themselves. They need to protect themselves. So both are going to have a fear of loss, of connection. And yet there's going to be a way that usually both are participating, but there's usually going to be a way that the one who has the biggest fear and the lowest threshold, okay, and that is probably the one who activates bigger and quicker, has the largest fear. And eventually that pattern is going to repel and push away the masculine. And so the biggest fear will come true. It's all subconscious. Now, what's an example of this happening on the reverse side of that, right? So on the reverse side of that, you might have a masculine who has a lot of fear, and it might be a deep abandonment wound, and they tend to be the ones then that this shows up as they need more control. They're micromanaging, right? They might be a little bit more dominating. They might want to, control what and how the feminine moves through life, let's say. Or they may be hell-bent in conjunction with this on wanting to control the feminine, but wanting to do what they want to do as well. Now, maybe I'm complicating that too much, coming from my own experience. So let's break that apart. So if we have a masculine that is more dominating, controlling, isolating, criticizing, a feminine will either kind of collapse into that, right? And become a victim to that. And this then allows that masculine to keep operating in these very deep subconscious fear-based ways that are not serving him, because it's never really going to be enough for him to feel safe and loved. He will never be able to control enough for that. The other point of this, or the other side of that coin, is that he will be so afraid of that loss And yet, everything that's happening, all of the ways that he tries to hold and cling, which we could say is a bit more of an imbalanced inner feminine to that masculine, she's going to eventually say that's enough and leave. So his biggest fear will come true. Just like the feminine's biggest fear will come true if she can't learn how to heal her own deep emotional wounds. If he can't learn to heal his deep emotional wounds and come into his own integrity, center, sovereignty, and his own safety, and his own knowing his lovability and worth, okay, this kind of goes both ways, but both will create the conditions for the explosion and ultimately the separation. And if they don't heal this still, it's going to go become a pattern through relationships and karmically. So this is what we're talking about, right? Yes, there's all of these, valuable and true to form therapeutic perspectives and ways to deal with it, right? And all of it comes from healing your shadow. However, what we're doing is we're working with deep soul healing, deep soul reclamation that is asking us to mature and evolve and come into our own wholeness, where we are not needing the other to keep us safe, to prove their love, to be always in connection, or to, be always in separation and in containment. And when we heal all of this, we live more harmoniously within ourselves because we are more healed and whole. And as we become more healed and whole, which is an ongoing process, we open our hearts more. Our head and our body connect. We feel safe to love because even if rejection or separation happens, it's not the end of the world anymore. And we know innately our worth and our value that we are. And we know the lovability. Now, all of this is a process, right? It starts with self-love. It starts with really owning who we are, how we tick, why we tick like we do, and then choosing something different. Now, some people find their path to be, they kind of find that status quo, or they find where they have that safe space, right? They have that safe person. And that is enough for them, right? Both people can operate in a level of connection that might not be what they both really, really want or desire on a deeper level, but it doesn't force the hand, right? It doesn't force things to need to be really looked at, to address, to go deeper. And that's not good or bad, right or wrong. That is just how some people choose to be in relationship. And I find that maybe relationship, right, is not really in romantic relationship, I'm saying, may not be their soul's path of operating on the world. But for those of us who this is, we are the holders and the carriers and the activators and the purifiers of the old way to bring in higher frequencies and higher level consciousnesses of love, higher expressions of intimacy, of safety, of trust, of openness. Because my guess is everybody knows when you feel that connection, when you've had that experience or experiences, right? When you know what it feels like to be with like that person, and when you really open to it, life changes. We face obstacles with more ease and grace. We actually are open to more abundance, both materially and energetically. There's more freedom, there's more levity, there's more creativity that comes through. There is more joy, right? There's more energy to move through our lives. And simultaneously, that kind of connection brings a grounding force of the two that create a very, very important power structure of love. It is a signature. This is where we're going. But we have to, we gotta clear away the dust of the older, deeper patterns. And we can do that together. We can do that apart. Oftentimes it's easier in some ways to do it apart, but oftentimes we don't really know what's really in there until we're in relationship. That's where we come into conscious relationship. We allow our karma to be recognized and we work together. We gain more wisdom, we gain more clarity, we gain more connectivity. We stretch our edges together and we're clear and we're open and we learn how to do it together. And then that moves into sacred union and divine union. So that's it on that one. So check it out, right? Read your own inner room, read the room of your relationship dynamics, and read what it is that you're truly wanting, not from the ego need, but from that deep soul presence. And then begin to let that guide your heart. And you will never go wrong when you're allowing the soul and the heart to lead the way. All right. Links will be below if you're interested in working with me. And thanks for subscribing and liking if this resonates. Blessings.